Okay, this is our first video for Chapter 9. It's all about probability. This is for Lesson 0, which means it's all prerequisite knowledge. It's all information that you have learned in previous grades, but it's just a review. So go ahead and follow along in your notes. First, it says a fair number cube. This is also called a die. Some of us call this dice if it's more than one. Is rolled once. Create a list of all the possible outcomes. So here we are reviewing the word outcome. So what you need to know about the word outcome is an outcome is any result from a possible probability experiment. So if we roll a die, you have to think, what could we get as a result of rolling that die? Well, we could get a 1, we could get a 2, we could get a 3, we could get a 4, we could get a 5, or we could get a 6. So all of those are the possible outcomes if we talk about rolling a die. If we talk about flipping a coin, the possible outcomes are heads or tails. Okay, so think about the possible results when you do that experiment. Number 2, find each probability based on your set of outcomes in number 1. Okay, so just as a refresher, our set of outcomes was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those were the 6 outcomes for rolling a die. So when we do probability, we write it as a fraction, and we count up our total number of outcomes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that will be our denominator. Our numerator is the number of favorable outcomes, so the number of outcomes that we actually want to have happen. So number 2a says the probability of getting a 5. So look at our outcomes. How many of those outcomes are 5s? Well, just one of them. So that probability is 1/6. Out of 6 rolls, we would expect to get a 5 one time. Let's do B together. We want to know what's the probability of getting an even number. Well, remember, first thing we start off with is our denominator. All of our possible outcomes is 6. How many of those outcomes are even? That's 2, 4, and 6. There are 3 even numbers. So our probability of getting an even number is 3/6. Now we would want to go ahead and simplify this, divide both by 3, and that gives us a probability of 1/2. So that means out of 2 rolls, we expect to get an even number one time. I skipped C. I'd like you to do C by yourself. I'm going to skip down here to D because it talks about something a little bit different. We have the word or going on, so let's set up our fraction. We want to know what's the probability of getting a 3 or a 5. Well, first of all, our denominator is going to be 6 because there are 6 total outcomes. Now we go up and we say, how many of our outcomes are 3s or 5s? Well, that's not a 3 or a 5. That's not a 3 or a 5. This is a 3 or a 5. That's not. This is a 3 or a 5. And that's not. So 2 of our outcomes are 3s or 5s. So that would be 2/6 as our probability. Or in probability means that we'd be happy with either one of them. So we're happy with a 3, we're happy with a 5. What's the probability that we get something that makes us happy? Again, we want to go ahead and simplify that. We can divide them both by 2. That gets us a probability of 1/3. That means that out of 3 rolls, we would expect to get a 3 or a 5 one time. Last one that I'm going to do with you is probability of not getting a 4. This little guy right here is called a complement. It's read as the word not. So make a note of that in your note packet. We read that as not. Okay, so probability of not getting a 4, well, let's set up our fraction. We know there are 6 total possible outcomes, and we want to know how many of them are not 4s. Well, I'm going to switch colors here. 1's not a 4, 2's not a 4, 3's not a 4, 4 is a 4, so we don't want that. 5's not a 4, 6 isn't a 4. So that means of all of our possible outcomes, 5 of them are not the number 4, so our probability of not getting a 4 is 5/6. Out of 6 rolls, we expect to not get a 4 5 times. So that's a quick review of probability. Remember, I skipped C and I skipped F. I would like you to do those 2 on your own. Number 3, what number represents the probability of an event that is impossible? An event that is impossible has the lowest probability. That lowest probability is the number 0. Okay, so 0 is the lowest probability. I'd like you to write an example of an event that has a probability of 0. I'll give you an example, but you can write something different. Okay, so my example would be the probability that I drop my pen and it stays floating in the air. That's a probability of 0. It's not going to happen. Okay, so think of something else that would be impossible, could not happen, and write that event in your notes. Number 4, what number represents the probability of an event that is certain? That means it is guaranteed to happen. This is our highest probability. Our highest probability is the number 1. Not 100, not 100%. We're talking about fractions here. So this would be 1, maybe even 1 out of 1, meaning if we try something one time, it is guaranteed to happen one time. Okay, so 1 is our highest probability, 0 is our lowest probability. 0 means it's never going to happen. 1 means it is certain or guaranteed to happen. So I'd like you to write your own example of an event that has a probability of 1. I'll give you my example. Do not write this down. Create your own. Something that has a probability of 1 is that the sun is going to come out tomorrow. At some point tomorrow, the sun's going to come up. It's going to get light out. Even if it's gloomy, it's still going to be daytime. So that's a guaranteed event. Okay, go ahead and write your own. Last one here for us, what number represents the probability of an event that is neither likely nor unlikely? Meaning we're not surprised if it does happen and we're not surprised if it does not happen. So very quickly, let's review. Our lowest probability is 0. Our highest probability is 1. So an event that is neither likely nor unlikely would happen somewhere, or have a probability somewhere in the middle. So what's right in the middle of 0 and 1? 1/2. Okay, so an event that is neither likely nor unlikely will have a probability of 1/2, which means we are not surprised if it does happen. We are not surprised if it does not happen. And my example here is flipping a coin and getting tails. If you flipped a coin right now and got tails, you wouldn't be super surprised. You wouldn't be disappointed by getting tails because it's something that just happens sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. So this means it's neither likely nor unlikely. Go ahead and write your own example. Okay, study these probability questions. Make sure that you are understanding them because these are the basics of probability and we're going to move quickly from here.